right, you're listening to HawkeTalk. I'm here today with Sarah Bailey, now Sarah Storey. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Yeah, it's a long time since anyone's reminded me of Sarah Bailey.
No, it's great to have you on. So I assume, just to kick it off, you immediately, you're born and you just are immediately into swimming, cycling, everything, and like total athlete from day one and marched forward from there, correct?
No, not exactly. My parents were really keen on me being outside, but there was never any, like Richard Williams, you're going to be an athlete, you're going to do this sport. It was literally be outside, enjoy being an active child. And then I picked up what I was really interested in and led them. So I think I learned to swim when I was 4 years old, started racing when I was 6. Learned to ride a bike with stabilizers, which is like the old-fashioned way. Everyone's on balance bikes these days. But I didn't do that till I was about 7. And then I didn't race a bike until I was about 27. So, swimming and all the school sports that you would imagine, cross-country, athletics, netball, rounders, tried to talk my way onto the boys' cricket team because back in those days, there was nothing for girls in cricket. But any sport, I wanted to have a go at it.
And so let's stepping back to when you were a young kid. You said your parents wanted you outside, but did you have a natural ability? Were you naturally athletic? Like, what was it that drew you to so much in the athletic side of things?
I think I just loved being outside, and every child is competitive. Children just love to move. And I discovered from being quite young, I could just move a little bit quicker than most of the other kids. And I was the fastest swimmer in my school when I was 8 years old. And I was the fastest all through the final 3 years of primary school. And it wasn't until I reached high school and others started to catch me up that I started to kind of realize that the world was a lot bigger than my little village primary school. Yeah. And I guess that taught me that if I wanted to keep being successful, as I'd sort of had that taste, I just needed to work really hard. So I'd say there was an element of natural talent, but a huge amount of, hard work and recognizing that it wasn't going to come easy and I needed to really knuckle down and put the hours in.
At what age, like when you were little, let's say 5, 6, 7 years old, did you want to be an athlete when you grew up? Was like that, like a lot of kids have that desire. Is that where you were already committed, like from a young age, this is what I want to do? Yeah,
I first watched the Olympic Games in Los Angeles in 1984. I was 6 years old. And it was those games that really sparked my imagination for Olympic sport. I didn't know the Paralympics existed until I was about 10 or 11 years old. So for me, it just was about sport, representing your country, having that chance to, maybe stand on a podium. And I just wanted to be like a Sarah. So Sarah Hardcastle was a British swimmer. She won silver and bronze medals as a 15-year-old in 1984. And I was just mesmerized by her work ethic and she was just totally committed and trained really hard. And I loved her story. And as we had the same name, I just wanted to be like that big Sarah as she was older. And so I worked out by the time I was 14, there'd be a Games in 92. And that was my target from being 6 years old. I wanted to go to the Games in 92 and be like Sarah Hardcastle.
Not to pry, but let's talk about, I guess they would call it a disability, but at the same time, you were just saying that you were a faster swimmer than anyone anyways. You were born with, I'll let you get into it a little bit.
Yeah, so I've got, my left hand is, my left arm is shorter by about 4 centimeters. I've got no left hand. And when I was a child in primary school, it made no difference to anything. I was able to swim faster than everybody. That included the boys. I was the safest pair of hands on the netball court. I always just learned to adapt to make sure that I could do stuff in the same team. I'd do it slightly differently to everybody else, but it was just as effective. I was quicker than anyone running. So it wasn't until I made it into high school that I realized that I was starting to get a disadvantage. I was a very, very tall child. So in primary school, I was, 5'5". When I left primary school, I was really tall. And it meant that I had that height advantage. But as everyone caught me up and my having one paddle instead of 2 for swimming was harder. And it wasn't until, I was about 12 when I watched a news program about a girl who had a slightly shorter arm than me, but her target was the Paralympics in Barcelona. And suddenly it clicked. I always wondered whether everybody competed regardless. And then I discovered that no, they didn't. And that there was another avenue for sport. And I always continued in able-bodied sport. And that was where all my training was done and all of my racing in between parasport events. But there's so few parasport events in comparison that it was really necessary to just keep up doing the able-bodied sport.
Yeah. And so because of that, like I'm just curious, like as you were growing up, because you were born with that, right? I think I read it was something from
Yeah.
the umbilical cord wrapped around your hand. Is that right?
Yeah, no one really knows. It was just I was born in the days before scans or any kind of detection. And so they hypothesized it could have been the umbilical cord, it could have been, mesh, kind of like fibrous parts of the wound, the tissue. I got my hand stuck, but nobody really knows. And I've never really been, some people need an answer and I don't.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things.
And so in growing up, you were able to compete so well. Like, did you feel, I imagine you felt you knew you had something different, but did it ever feel like a bad thing or anything? Or was it just like, nope, this is what I have and I'm just going to compete?
Yeah, it was all very matter of fact. I'm a little bit slightly different, but I learned to do all the gymnastics things I needed to do. So I could do a handstand, I could do a one-handed cartwheel, I could do all of the things that you might expect there to be a challenge. I was obviously a bit lopsided in my handstand, but it didn't mean I was any less stable. And I just learned to do everything. And there were times when people would ask too many questions and I wasn't really old enough and mentally old enough emotionally old enough to handle those questions. So it did feel like, it doesn't matter. Does it matter to you? Why are you asking those questions? Let's talk about something else. But to me and my family, my grandma had worked with a lot of people with quite profound disabilities and learning disabilities and mental disorders where they really had got a huge amount of challenge every day. And she just said to my parents, it won't amount to anything. She'll always be able to do everything she wants. She'll find her way. And they just let me get on with it. If I was struggling with something, they offered help, but I rarely struggled.
Yeah. And so I was going to say your parents just never made anything of it, I assume, too. So it was just not, and is that part of it too? Like your parents were like, no, you're good. There's nothing to talk about here.
Yeah, exactly. And they would just, there was no, let us carry that for you. It was, you can carry that yourself. Whether you carry it on your left arm or your right arm, that's your choice, but we're not going to baby you over it. And I think it was just carry on as normal.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm always curious because it feels like a lot of times when you see those situations, it really comes from the parents, whether it's a woe is me, oh my God, there's this thing that we have to do, or whatever. Like everybody has certain things they have to deal with in life, and there's going to be yours, and that's totally fine. Absolutely.
And I often get emails or messages from parents who are really panicked. What am I going to do? How am I going to help? Is it my fault? What can I do differently? And I always try and say, just let life carry on and address everything as it comes. So, occasionally I've taught a little girl to tie her shoelaces because it is a little bit different when you first learn. So you're getting to grips with what you can do with the little buds of fingers that you may or may not have. But most parents overthink things. And I think maybe social media isn't a blessing in that sense, because when my parents had me, there was no such thing. And the doctor just said, she'll be fine. And they trusted the doctor. There was no one else to try and get in touch with to say, what do you think?
The blog post, the WebMD, everything and what it all means. Like,
no Google.
Yeah, exactly. We all thought that the age of information would be so liberating, and instead it's been a disaster. But so you decide 14 years old, you're going to pursue the Paralympics. You're 6 when you decide this. What was the reaction from your parents? As a 6-year-old, again, you've got to have the support of your family around you. Like, were they just like, sounds great, let's go?
So I went in. Mum always asked me to tell her what had been happening at the Olympics. I was always sort of glued to the telly during the games. And I told her about Sarah, and I told her about the fact I'd calculated when the games would be in 92 and how old I would be. And she was like, oh, that's nice. There's your tea. And, just very like, oh, yeah, another a 6-year-old story. She's talking again. So I don't think they really realized that I was as serious as I was. That was absolutely everything I really wanted to do. But they never said, oh, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. They were just quite happy to take me to all the sports fixtures and see how it went. And in the end, by the time we got to that 92, I was fast tracked into the team. So it wasn't that it's sudden. It was sort of a gradual process. It was just not happening. And I was just a kid at primary school. So it wasn't like they had to do a great deal different, just the usual taxi service that all the other parents were doing as well.
That's awesome. And so you mentioned about 12 was that's when everyone started to catch up on the athletic side.
Yeah, I think it was when I was 12, you start to get to that point where you meet more people in the sport. You're not just competing in your primary school. You get to high school. I'd started in a swimming club by then, and you're racing children from across the region. And suddenly you're a much smaller fish in a bigger pond. And you realize that village competition was just the village competition. And there's a much bigger world out there.
Yep. Got it. And so how did you end up being fast tracked into the Olympics after that, or the Paralympics?
So I had discovered that there was, so my coach at the time, he was a deaf Olympian, and I'd asked him about this lady I'd seen on the news, and he said, oh yeah, the Paralympics, there is a coordinator for that within the Northwest. So he gave me her address. It was a postal address. There was, no other way to contact people. You wrote them letters. So I wrote to this lady every time I did a personal best time in the pool. And I wrote to her for 18 months before she replied. And when she finally replied, it was the September of 1991. And within 3 weeks, I was at a regional championships. And from the regional championships, I went to the national training squad. And then within another 3 weeks, I'd been accepted onto the national training squad. And then we were, November 1991. So literally, if she'd have responded to my letter sooner, everyone says, oh, if she'd have told you, you'd have been at Europeans this year. And I mean, I was 13, so it didn't matter really. But she spent 18 months not replying to me. And it was a good job I was persistent.
Yeah, and that's what it takes, just going for it and going for it and going for it. So where were the 92 games?
In Barcelona. So Barcelona in 92, I sat watching the Olympics. And then 3 weeks later, the Paralympics started. The same ceremony where they shoot the arrow into the cauldron to light the games, like the cauldron for the games. Only the guy who shot the arrow did it from seated in his wheelchair. So it was a further. He had to shoot further because he wasn't 6 foot, whatever. But it's amazing. And it was the first games, I think, that had really captured the eye of the public in a sense that, pre-digital age, the queues for the venues, everybody wanted to come and watch. They had to reopen temporary stands that had been closed because they didn't think they would need them. And so really the entire city of Barcelona just stopped again because they'd had the Olympics. There was this huge vacuum, and then the Paralympics rolled into town and everyone was like, yay, let's do it again.
That's awesome. And are you from the UK? Where are you from originally, by the way?
Yeah, so I was born in Manchester. Okay. And I have always lived in the northwest of England.
Was it a little easier at 14 to not have to travel around the world and just travel a little bit over to Spain? Did that make it a little easier, or would it have not mattered? If it was in Southeast Asia, would you have still been a part of it?
I didn't think it would have mattered to me personally. Okay. I had travelled to Southeast Asia prior to that, not for competition, just as a family holiday. So I'd travelled long haul. But I think for my family, it was better that it was closer to home. I mean, in those days, something as simple as an internal flight wasn't an option. There was lots of things that you didn't have access to that athletes would take for granted these days. And I think it was definitely a lot easier that my parents were only, an hour and a half on a flight away. So they came with my brother and sister, and everyone could watch.
It makes sense. And by the way, were your parents athletes? Was there athletic history in your family? I know you mentioned outdoors, but what were their focuses?
So no, neither of my parents competed in sport. My dad at university level, but not, to any significant standard that was outside of, university, which is a lot lower standard than in the USA, the British universities.
In the US, competing at a college level is big.
Huge, exactly. Yeah, over here it's not. It's everyone does a bit, but it's mainly about the social side of a Wednesday evening and the students' union and the rugby team roll in. And some universities are based around performance, more so now, but back in the 60s, 70s, it was not the case. Yeah, but my great uncle had competed as a water polo player in 1904, I think it was. So Billy Dean was part of the British Olympic team. And so there had been an Olympian in the family, but not in the previous 2 generations, I don't think. So, and not direct bloodline. I was really the first one. And my sister and brother both enjoyed sport, again, regional, national level, but never. I was the one that took it beyond.
Got it. Very cool. And so how did the first Paralympics go? How was the experience? How did it go for you? Did you walk away feeling great about it? Would love to hear more about it.
Yeah, so the first Paralympics was a huge eye-opener, being away from home for the first time, 3 weeks in a village where everything's free and You've got athletes from all over the world, all different nationalities. You don't understand half of what anyone's saying in the food hall because everyone's talking their own language. And I loved languages at school. So I was like, I wonder which language that one is. But no, I walked home with 2 golds, 3 silver, a bronze, and 2 world records. I was the youngest double gold medalist for Great Britain.
How many? What were those medals?
2 gold medals, 3 silvers, and a bronze.
At 14.
At 14. And at the time, Britain had never had a medalist of that age win 2 gold medals at a Games. That record wasn't broken until 2008 when someone who was slightly younger than me won 2 gold medals in Beijing.
Did you expect to go in there and win like that at 14, like knowing that you were competing against the world's best?
No, not at all. I was going there to do personal best. Like the only thing I could control was how fast I swam. And I just went for experience. I was 14 years old. If I came away with a medal, that was a bonus. I was going to make a contribution to the relay teams. And that was a big part of being there. But nobody really gave me any inkling as to how they expected me to fare. We had a team manager at the time called Carol, who was utterly brilliant. And she never gave any context to just how good I might be. Everyone had thought about the prospects there. They'd looked at the European champs and world champs results from the previous 2 years. They looked at the sort of progress I was making and every time I got in the pool. But then that was a caveat to that I'd never raced over in a 50-meter pool. So I did one race in a 50-meter pool. I think it was just before the selection in order to make sure I could be selected, because it was quite unusual for someone to come in so late on in the cycle. Normally you'd have picked somebody up in the middle of an Olympic cycle. So for them to pick me up so late in the cycle, inside 12 months to go, only ever having raced in a short course pool, was obviously slight risk. But they also could hear what I was saying about, how focused I was. They could see me in training. They knew I was completely committed. So for your first or for your second ever long course meet to be the Paralympic Games, I mean, it's a good job I was 14 and didn't care.
And so you come out, doing incredibly well. Where was your mindset? Was it, well, okay, what's going to happen 4 years from now? Or were you like, wow, I did it. Like I accomplished what I wanted to. Like where were you sitting at that point?
I was straight back in the pool. I wanted 4 years to go like that. I was like, yes, let's do this again. And in hindsight, I should have had some time off. I should have had a bit of a rest, because even though I was a kid, it was still, a huge thing that my body had been through. So I should probably have had some time off, but I didn't. I was straight back into training and willing the next international competition to come quicker.
And so during the 4-year period, are you competing in other competitions constantly, or were you in school? Because you're 14 to 18 years old. Like, how did school fall in, and like social life, all those kind of things as you're growing up?
So I was training and racing, like sort of around school, basically, before school, after school, at the weekends. I was at competitions or training weekends. And I think in my final 2 years of school, the average attendance was 4 days a week. So I didn't ever do a full week at school. There was always some reason why I needed to be somewhere else. But my schoolwork, I took it with me. I was committed to school as well. I passed with, top grades and everything, and went on to college and then on to university. And I actually took my A-levels, which is our sort of final year of high school before you move to university. I took those exams in the final few weeks before the Games in '96. But I saw the training for the Games as part of my recovery from the exams. I was like, you need the headspace, can't stop training. But no, I was fine. I just had this juggle, and I've always been organised. I think the only thing that suffered was I didn't have a social life outside of training and racing. So the people I trained with, the teammates I raced with, they were my social life. So not having anything else meant that at school it was quite hard, because everyone, well, all the girls especially, were like, well, why are you so good you can't come and do this? Why are you, keeping yourself separate? Who do you think you are? So I didn't have a great time from a social perspective at school, but everything in my sport was so good, it didn't matter.
Yeah, I was going to say, did it really wear on you, or were you just like, it's cool, these are my friends instead, so it's not a big deal?
I mean, it did wear on me. I ended up developing an eating disorder, and I did struggle mentally with it. But I also knew that it didn't matter. So it was kind of like a monkey on one shoulder and then another monkey on the other shoulder. I managed it most of the time, but some of the times it got me down. And I'd will each week away to be at the weekends. And it probably was one of the reasons why I didn't go to school for a full 5 days. I only did 4. Because it was part of my coping strategy to look for reasons not to be in school. And I was confident I was doing the work in the right way, and my teachers were really, helpful. And I did feel mentally as though I should have gone straight to university and skipped high school. So I probably didn't help myself in that sense, because I'd grown up massively during the course of those first games. But you can't always pick your time for sport to happen. You just run with it.
And so you get to these next games, you get through high school, you compete. When going back, how was it? Was it like, oh, this is just routine again? Were you just as nervous? Like, how was that feeling to be back a second time?
Well, this is the time where I really, really felt the nerves. I think there was no nerves going into the first games. There was nerves at World Champs in the year in between, the Europeans, but the Paralympics, I knew that as defending champion, this was the one time where all the press is watching the Paralympic athletes, because in the interim, there's no TV coverage. It was not until this year that 2023 was the first time I ever had a World Championships on a television. So it took a long, long time in my career before it got to be on TV at World Champs. So for me, the Paralympics was the first time there'd been any attention on how good I could be at a second games, having already won 2 gold. And I remember being so nervous. I was freezing cold. We were in Atlanta. It's obviously humid, very hot in the summer. And I was wearing so many layers. I was just so nervous. I was freezing cold. And if you'd offered me a plane ticket, I probably would have gone home. I was like, I just don't know if I can do this. But as soon as I got into the pool for the first race, I was defending champion. And as soon as I got through the halfway mark, and I moved into the lead in the third 50, I realised that all the work I'd been doing, all the hours in the morning before school and managing it through my exams, and I just hung on for dear life in that final 50. And you touch the wall first, and suddenly everything vanishes, and you feel invincible again. And that really set me up for the entire week. So I was successful in defending both titles. I added a 3rd title and a silver and bronze for good measure.
Yeah, why not? That's amazing. And so, going back to it, so how many Olympic Games did you participate in?
In swimming, I did 4.
Yeah.
And so far I've done 4 in cycling.
Got it. So swimming, was it 92, 90, what would that be? 92, 96, 2000, and 2004? Is that what you did?
Yeah.
Okay. And so during the next 2, what else, did anything shift, or was it just like back to, I don't want to say routine, but like, we're back, we're going to do this again? Like, how was the feeling of going back each time?
Well, I went straight to university after the games in 96, and the coach in the town where I chose to go to uni, the city rather, refused to coach me because I wasn't on the Olympic team. So it's the first time I'd come across any type of, discrimination. And I tried to coach myself, but I didn't manage it very well. I ended up with chronic fatigue syndrome. So just attending the games in Sydney was a huge achievement, having been so unwell in the previous 3 years. And I was finally turning a corner with my health in the final 12 months before those games. But I'd been so unwell and in such a state. I'd had glandular fever twice, and that had led to chronic fatigue. So I was in a position where just competing was, a big achievement. And I swam faster than I'd swum in the previous 2 games in one of my races, my main race at the time. But it wasn't quite good enough to win the gold medal. I lost the race by a couple of tenths of a second. So I'd got back to being right at the very top, and certainly my best. But at the time, it didn't feel as though I'd achieved anything, because everyone had expected me just to win. So that was quite hard to kind of reconcile with. And I gradually got stronger and stronger in the following sort of 4 years into the games in Athens. I was back to winning world titles in 2002. But just before the games in Athens, my mum was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so suddenly our whole world stopped, because it didn't matter anymore. Sport was great fun, but her life was more important. So that really kind of took a toll on a lot of things. And she had surgery and then started chemotherapy after the games. I picked up a virus at the games, and it was probably, of the 8 games I've done, it was probably my least good performance of all of those 8. But I won 2 golds.
By the way, just to be clear, you still got medals, right?
I won 2 silver and a bronze medal. Yeah. Still on the podium.
You're still on the podium.
I was still on the podium, but at the time it kind of felt as though I had been distracted, and maybe that's why I picked up a virus in the village. I wasn't fully concentrating on hygiene. The village is you need to be fully on the hand gel and looking after yourself. So I think for me, those games were, I'll always remember kind of that build up as being me finishing training and rushing back to my parents' house to look after mum and to help her after she'd been, through surgery. So that was a very different experience. But in the games in Athens, I met the cycling team, and that's where the nugget of an idea to get on a bike started. It was more, just for fun, but it ended up being something that became very significant.
Okay, so to talk about that, did you grow up cycling? I mean, was that something you were always doing for exercise too, or was it just you were in great shape from swimming, and when you tried it on cycling, you picked it up?
Yeah, so I'd use my bike as transport. I'd commuted from college to swim training when I didn't have a car. So I'd ridden a bike, but I'd not done it with any great structure. And so when I picked up cycling, I went to the velodrome in Manchester, and then after a few months, they trialed me over 3,000 meters, and I had the physiology that was needed. And I just needed to tidy up some of the technical side. Now in cycling, you can tidy up your technical side for years and years and years and years. I'm still tidying up my technical side because there's so much to it. But at the time, just a little bit of tidying up on the technical side was putting me into the realms of an international cyclist. And so 3 weeks after the trial,
I was going to say, so what is that, 2008-09 is when you got into it?
2005.
Oh, 2005.
So straight after the games in Athens. Yeah.
So 2005, you get into it. How old were you at that point?
I would have been 27. 27.
To pick up a sport at 27 without any prior history and naturally be just a world-class cyclist, where did that come from? Is it just, did you have the endurance from swimming and just you were athletic, or what do you think created that?
I think initially it was just the mentality. I'd done sport as a kid. I was national level in more than just swimming, and cross country and athletics and netball. I was on the county team and table tennis champion in the county. And so I'd always done lots of sports. So the idea of another sport was just exciting. And then when I realized that this is something, actually, I quite like this. And I'd always watched the individual pursuit and thought, if I was going to be a cyclist, that would be my event. That would be one of my, main events. And that's what they focused on. The physiology I had from swimming, sort of the length of time my races in the pool versus the length of time of that individual pursuit were comparable. I had to have a huge amount of patience with myself for the longer events on the road. And that's probably why the road racing developed from sort of 2010 onwards. But for the first 5 years, very much focused on the track. Attending the track sessions was a bit like attending swim training sessions, very structured, very specific types of sets that you would do on a bike, that you could compare to how you would train in a pool, similar gym sessions. So I think a lot of it was transferable. And then it was about my mentality, about not being too afraid of the techniques that I needed to learn. And I've always been a sponge for learning stuff. So taking it on board and working out how to do something. And I guess that, when you say it now, you were 27, you changed sports, that's a bit cool. But at the time, it just felt like quite a normal thing to do.
Yeah, got it. And so you switch into it and you sign up just to go to the Paralympics again in 2008 for it, correct?
Yeah, so in the UK, we've got a system, that UK Institute of Sport, and the funding system is that they fund you, provided you maintain a certain level within international competition. And what they said to me at the UK Sport was that they would fund me for another year at the same level I had been at in swimming to give me that chance for transition into a new sport. And they now have a formal program for that. So I was the first person to do it, but they have a formal program of how it works. And so they did that. And by the time I'd finished that first year as a cyclist, I was a world record holder on a bike. So my funding just rolled on. So for me, it meant that I had then got 2 years, into the next games and an opportunity to see whether I could translate that early success into Paralympic success again.
Got it. And is that common? Are there a lot of people that switch sports completely that are like, how often does that happen?
It's not very often. I think there are a few good examples in the UK. That a couple of my former swimming colleagues have gone into canoeing. One of them has come into cycling as well. There's a half dozen or so. I think there's some good examples in the States of people who've switched between, maybe swimming and athletics or skiing. A lot of the wheelchair races will do hand cycling and track and field or marathon, but it's not as frequent as people have thought. And they do have a formal program to see if they can maximize opportunity more for those athletes in sports that are traditionally very young sports like swimming and gymnastics, and sports like cycling, where actually as you get older, you get stronger and more capable of managing that longer race. And
so stepping into this, you've obviously done very well. And you were in 2008, 12, 16, and 20 and got several golds in each, correct?
Yes. So 2008, I had 2 golds and then 4 in my home games in London. And then I won 3 in each of Rio and Tokyo.
And so during that period, did it just feel like routine, or was this like every 4 years was another big challenge? Like, tell me about the feeling. Again, I don't know if I've ever talked to someone that has gone to the Olympics from 1992 through 2020. Like, how has that been when you've done it so many times? Does it start to get routine, or does it have the same hit every time?
It has the same hit in sense of like the opportunity to do well and what the pinnacle of your sport. Yep. I think the thing with cycling is that the events are so different. So this is the thing that has been different to swimming. So whilst initially the path in there was similar, there were similarities, each of the 4 events I won gold in London are all very different. So 500 meter time trial is 36 seconds. The 3,000 meters 3 minutes 30. The road time trial is 25 minutes, and the road race is a couple of hours. So literally, you couldn't expect more of your body within a week. And I think what I really enjoy is that piecing together those performances when you have got so much to consider. And obviously, before I had kids, then I was on the women's team going to the Delhi Commonwealth Games. I was part of the team pursuit squad qualifying for the Olympics, and I raced at World Cups in the team pursuit, the women's squad. And so everyone, I took all these opportunities to try and improve myself as an athlete and to race in the women's peloton. I've raced in the Tour of California and won the polka dot jersey there and the breakaway jersey. I've won stages in World Tour races with UCI women. So in cycling, there was just so many things to go at. Whereas in swimming, obviously, it was like a swimming lane and you did a different stroke. And I think that's the thing that made each training cycle, so 4 years different, was that there was always something new to try and to adapt. So from 2008 to 2012, it was the team pursuit. After 2012, it was professional racing and a baby. After 2016, it was another baby and more professional racing and then a lockdown. And then since 2020 is a sense of how do I transition myself into what is, whenever that is, if it's after Paris or not, the next phase of my life, because my oldest daughter, is my daughter and she's 10 and she's starting to compete. So this last number of years since Tokyo has been about the biggest juggling act I think I've ever done.
Yeah. Training yourself and having your 10-year-old train?
So she's gradually improved. She's an international dancer. She was at the Dance World Cup finals in the summer. She's a biathlete. She runs, she swims, she does everything. And I have a 6-year-old boy who is just started playing football. And then because of the way, the world economic situation is, athlete funding is not worth anywhere near as much as it was 12 years ago. So I have a job now and, there's lots of different kind of requirements in order to maintain being able to be an athlete at the highest level. But also, I'm 46, so normal life happens too. And that's one of the really cool parts about it.
And so real quick question on that, like what for up until recently, what was the funding like so that you could pursue this for so many years? Like were there endowments and things that would allow you to have your sort of life paid for while you trained, or did you have to work through the whole thing?
Well, I've always worked through the whole thing. I think the balance of how much work versus how much income came through the grant funding. So the UK sport system I spoke about, that funding as a total amount is the same now as it was when I started cycling. So each month there's a stipend paid to athletes provided you meet a certain level. And in paracycling, that's a gold medal at the World Championships or the Paralympic Games. If you become world champion every year, then you're fine. You keep that level. But that level hasn't changed as a total amount. So there's been no inflationary additions to it. It's the same. So the balance of income has had to sort of shift more so that I have to earn more myself outside of that. And obviously, as life changes, you have other expenses once you have children. And so between my husband and I, when he stopped racing in 2013, life has meant a slightly different balance. So I work as well and then fit training around work, whereas previously I would have fitted work around training. And it's just a different transition and a different kind of mindset, I guess. And I think one of the things that's been interesting over the last sort of 3 years is that balance with that shift towards working more than training.
Got it. And you are going to compete in Paris? That's the plan?
That's the plan, yeah. So it's only 3 years to Paris, says my however old he was son. And I want to go to the Paralympics because I wasn't allowed to go to Tokyo because of lockdown. So he was 3 and he's like, Mum, I need to watch you in person. So you have to carry on. So yeah, here we are.
And what do you think will be next after that? Any concept of will you keep going? Do you think this is probably it? Wait, have you thought about that? I mean, I'm sure you thought about it, but have you made any decisions?
I haven't made any decisions. There's World Championships directly after the Games in Vienna. And they are, like, I think my road race in Paris is the 6th of September and the time trial at the World Champs is the 22nd of September. So for me, I know that after the Games, that's where I would like to go because it's a World Championships with everybody there again. So the women, the men, the under-23, the juniors, the paracyclists. And I've been campaigning my entire 30-odd year career for parity and inclusion and being able to compete and rub shoulders at competition with the people you train with. So it's there. And I feel not just a duty, but I want to go and defend the titles I won here in the UK in the summer. So for me, that's really easy. And then I think that takes me to the end of next September. And I go, right now I can assess, what's next. And that will give me a chance, a bit of breathing space, I think, to say, have I got another 2 years into the Commonwealth Games or World Championships in the next year, whatever. But I like the fact I've got that double focus next summer.
Love it. And so last question for you. What would be your advice to someone that is trying to pursue their own dreams, that is trying to, make it to the top level of what they're doing? Like what's something you either heard or wish you heard? What would be that one thing you would tell someone else? So
one of my swimming coaches used to say, don't be ordinary, be extraordinary. So doing everything you can, basically, and a little bit more, and always seeking out those extra opportunities and taking them when you get them, because you don't know if it'll come around again. And you don't know if it'll work, but it doesn't matter if it doesn't, because at least you'll know. And I think that's just trying to have a plan and being open-minded about that plan, because it doesn't have to follow a dead straight line. You can turn corners, you can U-turn, you can go back on yourself, you can revisit things you enjoyed, and maintaining that enjoyment is absolutely key. And it's quite non-specific to say all of those things, but I think everybody's goals are so specific to them. You almost need that non-specific advice to say, in your situation, apply these principles of operation, if you like, and don't be afraid to take a chance.
Love it. Well, Sarah, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on HawkeTalk.
No, you're very welcome. It's great to talk.